If you are new to fertility yoga or it's something you'd like to learn a little bit more about, then today's episode is for you. I'll be speaking with a special guest who explains exactly why the practices of yoga, meditation, and breathwork can have such an impact on your ability to regulate your nervous system, improve your overall health, and most importantly, your fertility. All of that is coming up on today's episode. Welcome to your journey to fertility. This is the podcast that blends science with spirit to give you all the tools you need as you navigate your fertility journey. I'm your host, Jennifer Edmonds, and for the last 15 years, I've been helping women on their journeys to motherhood and beyond. I believe that combining the latest scientific research along with the best energetic and mindset practices will help you to avoid putting your life on hold and bring you closer to your baby. Each week, you'll learn ways to support your fertility and trust your body so that you can stop stressing that you'll never have your baby and finally walk your path to motherhood. This is the Your Journey to Fertility podcast. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me today. The episode that you're about to listen to is with one of the best people that you're going to meet in the fertility space. I have the pleasure today of sitting down with Lauren Enright, who is a holistic fertility coach, a birth doula, a yoga teacher, a mother of two, and she also has a background in neuroscience, which is one of the things that I love most about Lauren. She is that perfect blend of science and spirit. Because while she has such a sciencey background, she is a yoga teacher these days as well, and her main focus is on helping women on their journeys to motherhood. And I love that she is able to bring the best of both worlds, all of the sciencey background that she brings so beautifully, as well as this deep spiritual practice that yoga tends to offer as well. So I'm really excited for you to listen to this conversation. She explains everything about the practice so well. Lauren is also one of the teachers that teaches inside my fertility yoga program. So if that is something that you would like to learn a little bit more about, I'll put a link in the show notes to that. So without further ado, let's begin. Here is Lauren. Lauren, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here with me today. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Can we start with learning a little bit more about you, who you are, what is the work that you do?
Hi, Jen. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. And so I am a holistic fertility coach. I am a fertility yoga and meditation teacher. I'm also a birth doula. I teach prenatal yoga and postnatal yoga. So I really get the honor and the privilege of supporting women through all of those stages of their motherhood journey, which is such a blessing.
Yeah, it really is. And one of the things that I find so fascinating about you is that, when we talk about yoga and fertility, people tend to assume there's a lot of kind of woo-woo elements going on there, but it really isn't all that, is it? It is very much based in science. But you come from such a scientific background. So can you tell us what you did in a previous life and how you ended up becoming a fertility yoga teacher?
Yes. So I've always been an eager student. I think that's one thing that has followed me throughout my life. I'm an eager student. I'm also a very passionate teacher. I come from a family of teachers. And so when I went to do my academic studies, I started off in neurobiology, and I got a bachelor's degree in biology. And then I went on to specialize in neuroscience. And so I went on to do a master's degree in neuroscience. I very much love the learning and the teaching because I did some teaching when I was in grad school. And ultimately at the time, I thought I wanted to become a professor. I wanted to be in academia. But when I started to really find out what the research life was like, how it was very driven to have to get grants and write a lot of grants. And it was just really focused on the research. And ultimately, I just wanted to work with people. what I decided to do is that I was like, okay, I'm going to go, since I love teaching so much, I'm going to go into education. So after my master's degree, I did a teaching degree, and then I went on to become a high school science teacher. And I did that for nearly a decade. And then I had my two children. It was the birth of my son, who's my second child, that inspired me to become a birth doula. So I knew after I had my first, I knew that I was going to want to do something different. I knew that, as a lot of moms do, after we have children, it really changes so much. And when I went back to work as a teacher and I started to do that grind that a lot of moms do of dropping your kid off at daycare, early in the morning and then going to work, like driving to work in traffic, being at work all day, driving home, picking the kid up from daycare. And I was just like, I don't want to do this, and I'm going to find a way. And at the time I had no idea what I was going to do. I had no idea. I just knew that I was going to find a way. And so this kind of started this next chapter of my life, which has really been a chapter of me following my heart, which is so very different than, I feel like, the first chapter of my life, which was very much me following like my brain, in a way of just like, and I think I've always followed my joy, because at the time, I think studying really brought me a lot of joy. But I started doing Bikram yoga. That started my journey of yoga, and I was teaching at the time. And so I was already practicing yoga. I had this amazing second birth experience where I gave birth at a birthing center with a midwife. And it was a natural birth, and it was an empowering birth. And, these empowering births that we hear of, they are possible, right? And they do happen. Not everybody ends up being able to have access to that. But I had such a beautiful, empowering birth that I just decided that I wanted more women to be able to know about it, that this was possible, to have a birth like that. I wanted to support them in it. And so at first I thought I wanted to become a midwife. And when I started to look into midwifery training, and I realized that it was going to be a 4-year degree, at that time in my life, I had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I was just like, I can't go back to school for another 4 years at this point in my life. And so I did a birth doula training, and then the school that I did my birth doula training with, they also had a fertility specialist certification program. And I was like, this just makes sense. Again, like I wasn't using my brain to be like, oh, should I do this? What am I going to do with this degree? Or what am I going to do with this training? It was, again, just, I was following my heart. It just made sense to do this program. And so I did. And and then I started teaching prenatal yoga, and then it all kind of started to unfold from there.
It is just such a beautiful thing to be able to support a woman from that stage of preconception and perhaps struggling all the way through to being able to see when they have their child. Like, it's unbelievably wonderful, isn't it? So we are very blessed to be able to do this kind of work.
Yeah. And I just have to tell you a quick little story. I had a client that I'd been working with who had been having fertility challenges for probably about 5 years. She had 4 miscarriages over that period. And she finally went on her 5th pregnancy. That pregnancy stuck. And then she asked me to be her birth doula.
Oh.
And I got to be there for the birth of her baby. And now she's in my mom and baby yoga and mindfulness class. And it was really the first time that I'd worked with someone for that long, for those, 4 years, and then was able to be at her birth. And now I'm able to watch her step into motherhood. And oh my goodness, it's just such a blessing.
Special experience. My gosh.
Yeah.
Laura, can I ask you, what is fertility yoga to you? And why do you think it is important for people who are struggling?
As I was thinking about the answer to this question, I was like, well, what really makes fertility yoga different than regular yoga? Right? And so I was going to start with, it's a mind-body practice, or it's a mind-body breath practice. But really, traditional yoga that's not fertility yoga is a mind-body breath practice. However, what I see in so I live in Montreal in Canada, and what I see in the yoga studios and in the West in general, because it's not just here in Montreal, but I see that a lot of the yoga in yoga studios is focused a little bit more on the yang and on the activation and on the fitness and on the strengthening, right? And I don't see as much really traditional yoga out there. And so really at the end of the day, I think fertility yoga is just more, that's how I see it. It's more of a traditional yoga practice because we incorporate elements of, the breath. And, in my fertility yoga, I do talk a lot about the mind. And I do incorporate a little bit of meditation into my yoga practices, right? So we're not just focusing on yoga asana. We're also focusing on the other limbs of meditation. We're talking about pranayama, the breath work. But then also going into inquiry and really using some of the philosophy of yoga to help our students be able to meet the demands and the challenges of their journey and their life. So I like to talk about self-compassion, and just having an internal awareness of body sensations, and that would probably be regular yoga as well. But, really at the end of the day, what makes fertility yoga different? Well, I'd say it's the language that we use. When I teach fertility yoga, I'm specifically referencing very often the pelvis. I am specifically talking about the womb or your womb space. And what I've come to learn is that not everybody necessarily understands that language because they might not know the term womb, or they just might not have a connection, which is, I think, very normal in today's society. We are just disconnected from the space of the body. So then I go into a little bit more sciencey, words, and I'll be like, well, your uterus. And then sometimes, that is a little bit more helpful for somebody that, it doesn't really understand the term womb. But so the language that we're using in fertility yoga, and then, choosing asanas, postures that are really targeting the pelvis, so that we can be enhancing circulation, we can be increasing blood flow to this area. Postures that are increasing blood flow to the brain, so we can be bringing more blood to the pituitary gland, because that is the ultimate regulator of our hormones. So it's in these ways that fertility yoga is a little bit different than just general yoga.
You explain it beautifully. Thank you. And I find that all of us that teach fertility yoga, and there's not that many around, I don't think. Maybe it's growing slowly, but everyone has just a slightly different way of explaining how they teach it and what they kind of believe it is. And I think that's wonderful. Everyone's got just something slightly different to bring to the table. Can we talk about this? I suppose it's a bit of a buzzword these days, but this idea of being able to regulate your nervous system. And whenever I talk about nervous system regulation, I always think, what would Lauren say? Because you're like an actual neuroscientist who studied the brain extensively. So can you explain to us what a dysregulated nervous system is? This is 3 questions. What it is, why it's problematic if you're trying to conceive, and how does fertility yoga help regulate you?
Ooh, wow. Okay. You might have to remind me of the 3 as we're going.
Let's start. Okay. What is dysregulation within the nervous system?
So I think in order to understand, and very simply, what nervous system regulation is that we have to understand that there are, and we're just going to simplify, we're going to say there's 2 states. So we could either be in a state of activation or upregulation, right, which is governed by our sympathetic nervous system. Okay? Or we can be in a state of deactivation or downregulation, which is governed by the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay? And so it's not a matter of like one being better than the other, or, having to always be in, we need to be in downregulation, this amount of time, and up. No. Right. So, and just like everyone has a different definition, I think, of fertility yoga, I think somebody else might explain this in a different way, but this is really my understanding of it and how I like to describe it, is that we need both, and we need the ability, and it's important to be able to be upregulated, right? We need to be able to be alert and on, and at the same time, we need the ability to be able to downregulate and to be able to come into rest. And this is how we're wired, and that our nervous system naturally will go through this cycle. Okay, and it's about a 90-minute cycle of where we're going to be in upregulation. So naturally, our nervous system is wired so that we're going to be in upregulation for about 90 minutes. But then, like a wave, we're meant to then come down. And so then we downregulate naturally without even trying to force it. And this is in a cycle of about, right? And it's not like precisely 90 minutes, but about 90 minutes of upregulation, about 15 to 20 minutes of downregulation, right? And so what often happens is that we, are busy. It's not convenient to downregulate when we're in the middle of doing something very important, right? And so we override the message, and then we keep going, right? And then so we're totally not in tune with the messages from our body that are telling us to downregulate. And then, so if we don't allow ourselves to come into that down, and I mean, it is happening, like whether we like it or not, but then it's the idea that we're fighting it, which kind of like doesn't really allow us to have that 15, 20 minutes of downregulation. So then when it comes, we're going to be even more upregulated, like in the next cycle, right, of the up and down. And then this just is what sends our nervous system just into this kind of state of dysregulation, where then we're not on this natural cycle, and we're constantly living in a sympathetic state of activation. And of course, this is not good for, it's not just fertility, but if we're talking about specifically for fertility, so what activation and upregulation, it's triggering your fight or flight response. It's triggering your stress response, right? And so if you're in fight or flight, if you're in your stress response, right, then this is signaling from your nervous system to your body that it's not safe. And if your body is not safe, okay, then it's not going to want to conceive. It's actually going to reject fertilization and conception as a preservation mechanism, because the nervous system doesn't know. It's just almost like a code where it's just reading these inputs. It doesn't know, like it's with your eyes, of course, you can look outside and right now I'm in this room and I'm sheltered and I have clothes on my body and of course I'm safe, right? But the nervous system is signaling something else. And again, I think sometimes we don't know that we're in this chronic state of upregulation or chronic state of stress because we're just so disconnected from the signs that our body's sending. And so the nervous system is quite literally sending that signal to your body saying, you are not safe, therefore abort mission, right? Like we are not going to allow your body to conceive because that would not be smart right now, because your body is not a safe place.
You answered the first two questions there brilliantly. And so then how does a practice like yoga and meditation and breath work help to get your nervous system into more of a regulated or balanced state?
I think the first thing when I teach about how we can go about making sustainable changes in our mindset, in our nervous system, in our behaviors, okay, is that the first part of this requires awareness. Okay? And awareness is the first piece. You can't change what you're not aware of. So I'd say that is one of the biggest kind of things that meditation and mindfulness does. And we can even bring in yoga too, because if we are being cued to pay attention to the sensations in our body as we're doing yoga, then it's also a mindfulness practice, right? But those cues need to be there, because if we're just going through like a really fast flow sequence, we're not really having the ability to actually notice what's going on in the body, right? But when we are aware, and so then we have to know our signs. So we have to know, well, what are my signs that I'm in an upregulated state? What does that feel like for me? Because this is going to be slightly different for everyone. And this is where it really becomes this personal journey and exploration, because you can have a teacher or a coach, tell you, well, like, look out for this. And maybe we can give you a list of things, but ultimately at the end of the day, you're going to have to get to know your own signs. Right? So when you have that awareness of, oh, wow, when I feel agitated in my body, when I start to notice that I'm talking really fast, right? This is something that I teach often, that if you want to know when you're in upregulation, just look in your life and just notice the things that you do quickly. If you're talking quickly, if you're breathing quickly, if you're walking quickly and you don't need to be walking quickly, if you're driving, it's like this state of urgency, right? And this is often, we do things fast when we feel there's urgency, and often fast and urgency show us that we're in the state of upregulation. So once we can bring awareness to that, then we can go, oh, I have the ability to actually do something in this moment to change it. And I don't actually have to be, I always say what we practice, and a lot of yoga teachers will say this, what we practice on our mat, quote unquote, we bring into our life off our mat. And so the yoga practice and the meditation is the training ground, because then what you're doing consistently, right? And this is why it's so important to have a consistent practice, is because then you start to then do these things when you're waiting in the waiting room at the fertility clinic, for instance, or you're having a difficult conversation with somebody that you have a difficult relationship with. Right? And when we're able to be like, oh, wow, like in this situation, I notice the signs that my body's giving me, that my breath is giving me, that I'm in upregulation. And can I just take a big, long exhale, because exhalations help bring us into downregulation. Right? So the inhalation is linked to activation, sympathetic. And then the exhalation is linked to deactivation, parasympathetic. So if we want a way to be able to use our breath to try to switch gears and bring us into downregulation, we just focus on lengthening our exhales and maybe even just slowing down how we talk, slowing down the movements. That's like a way that we can literally help switch our nervous system into downregulation.
And you can find I couldn't help but just do it as you were saying that then.
Yes, exactly.
Like it's instant. It is instant. Yeah. And these tools are so portable. You can do them anyway. You can do them when you're driving, you can do them when someone's talking to you. And so, yeah, that is what I love about this practice. And you explained it so well. It's like the training ground. The yoga mat is the training ground for the rest of your life. That's a beautiful analogy. Thank you.
It's for the rest of your life, because these practices, when we do them in preconception, as we're trying to conceive, they carry through, and then they help us, and they're of service to us in pregnancy, and they're of service to us as we go to give birth, and then they're of service to us when we become mothers and we have challenging situations with our children. And so it really is, that's why I just see it as a way of life.
Absolutely is. Can we talk about mindset work? And this is something that you speak about a lot with your students and within the work that you do. What is mindset work to you?
Mindset work is, again, awareness, having the awareness of our internal voice, the internal dialogue, the words that we say to ourselves, the thoughts that we think, the conversations that we have in our head. Okay, so having an awareness of what those words are, what those stories are that we're telling ourselves, right? And then having an understanding that we have agency over those thoughts, over those words. I often say, there's a lot of my clients tell me, I feel like I have no control. Like there's nothing. And I mean, control is an illusion, and there's not a lot that we can control. However, the good news is, my friends, is that our thoughts, okay, the thoughts, I mean, and not necessarily, because a lot of our thoughts are programmed reactions, but this is the mindset work, right? So maybe you don't get to choose all your thoughts because you're in a situation and then a thought comes up, because this is just a pattern, right? And so it's a programmed thought. But then when you have an awareness of the thought and you really notice, oh my goodness, I'm saying these words to myself. I am not being kind to myself in this moment, right? You have the ability to say, I'm going to say something different. I'm going to switch the narrative. I'm going to tell myself a different story. Okay? And it's hard, but it's absolutely possible, right? And so to me, this is mindset work. It's we are going in, we are reprogramming our programmed reactions by changing the way we talk to ourselves, changing the words that we choose to use as we talk to ourselves in our head.
And why do you think that is so important when people are struggling to have a baby?
And I'm not sure exactly what teacher this comes from. I feel like so many people who talk about mindset work will talk about the pyramid of how your thoughts lead to, right? So we have a belief system, and our belief system is formed by our environment, people that are mentors, our parents, right? As we are brought up. So that's our belief system. I mean, it's very, very complex, of course, the belief system, but then our belief system is what then leads to the thoughts that we think. And then the thoughts that we're thinking, right, lead to emotion and feelings. And so we're going to think a thought, and then that's going to create a felt sense of a feeling. And then based on that feeling, that is going to then dictate the actions we take or the actions we don't take. Mm-hmm. So on one level, I think that's why mindset work is so important, because I do believe that, having belief, like an embodied belief that your body has the ability to get pregnant and stay pregnant, I think this is one of the most important things that is going to lead to ultimately having success on the journey, getting what your heart desires, getting pregnant, right? That there needs to be that belief, because, and especially for people that have been trying for a really long time, or that have, unexplained infertility, where there's really no medical quote unquote reason why they can't get pregnant. And this is really the work that I'm so passionate about doing. Is I'm like, okay, so, I would say like unexplained infertility is explainable, just not by Western medical science, right? Like we don't have tests, like medical tests or scientific tests that allow us to really look at somebody's belief system. And so, so I think this is, one of the reasons why it's so important to do the mindset work, because, thoughts become things, and through the power of belief, what you believe ultimately is going to impact the physiology of your body and how it behaves.
And it's so scientific when you look at it like that. We think about mindset work as, I don't know, kind of gets thrown in with toxic positivity, and I've just got to think happy thoughts all the time, and that's just not it. And it really does make such a big impact when you can start to rewire it, the way you explained. How do you think that meditation then fits in with mindset work? Because I know that is something you are passionate about, and I love the work that you do around this.
Again, it comes back to always number one, awareness. You can't change the thoughts that you're not aware of. It's that simple. You can't change the thoughts that you're not aware of. Right? And that's one thing that I see that meditation does, okay, is that meditation allows you to become a witness to your thoughts. It not only allows you to become a witness, but I think it also, when we start to have, right, because I think often we are so fused with the thoughts, someone who has not had this experience of understanding that, well, this voice in my head is simply just a voice in my head, that I am not the voice in my head. Right? You start to see that you can have a little bit of distance from your thoughts. And then when you have the distance from your thoughts, then you also start to realize that, now there's a little space where I can choose my reaction to a thought, because there's more spaciousness, right? There's the thought. I'm just going to become a witness to the thought. And then at the same time, there's also an awareness of how physically, and this is when we start to get into the somatic work of, okay, I notice that I'm having a thought. I notice that there's also this sensation or this emotion that I have right now. And where am I feeling this emotion inside of my body? And this is now I'm getting into, more somatic work and not how meditation helps with mindset. But it's just so powerful. Like
Mm.
meditation helps us develop an awareness of our thoughts so that we can change them. Meditation helps us develop an awareness of physical sensations in the body so that we can learn that we have agency over, noticing where we feel safety versus what might feel painful. I can go on and on. We could do a whole episode on meditation.
I know, and I think that we need to. But you're right, it is so powerful. And just being able to create that space between something that happens or the thought and your reaction to it, being able to respond with, a considered response as opposed to just reacting in the moment. And I find that is the most powerful thing meditation gave me. Yeah. We hear a lot in yoga, I think, and I talk about this as well. This idea of emotions getting trapped and stuck within the body. And especially we hear a lot of yoga teachers talking about it around the hips. We store a lot of emotions around the hips and other parts of the body. Can you explain how that works? How do emotions get trapped within the body? And especially when we're talking about infertility, these emotions like fear and shame, I find are so prevalent. 100% of the students that come to me would be dealing with fear and shame. And I don't think as women that is unusual either. Mm-hmm. So how does this get stuck within the body and what can we do to help release it or move through it?
In traditional Chinese medicine, I know that they consider the womb to be the second heart. And that there's this direct meridian or energetic line between the energetic heart center and the womb space where there's a second heart. Okay, so I think this is in one way where I like to describe it of, we have emotions. I like to remind people that all emotions are valid. We've been programmed to believe that there are good emotions and there are bad emotions. This is not the case. Emotions are all valid. Emotions all serve a purpose, an important purpose. And that's where the shame comes from, is when we have this belief that we shouldn't feel a certain way or that it's bad or wrong to have a certain emotion. And so I think it's very important that we start to see this differently. And I went through my own journey of this as well. I used to see certain emotions as bad I see it as the good girl syndrome, which I've definitely had to work with in my life, as I think a lot of women have, right? So if we're going to be a good girl, then we shouldn't get angry, or express certain opinions. So then we play small and we stay quiet. So, we have these big emotions, and emotion is energy and motion. So we could say that there are different vibrations or energetic frequencies that are associated with each emotion. So it's a sensation we feel. Every emotion, you can feel a sensation that comes with that emotion, right? So if I'm feeling, and for me personally, when I feel sadness, and this is something that I really only came to know after doing some deep work with a somatic therapist. And this is really how I got into somatic work, is when I experienced the power of it myself. And I always use my own body and life as a training ground, and I experience these things first. And then I'm like, oh, wow, it's really powerful. And, I never like to practice anything that or preach anything that I don't practice. I always practice what I preach. And so I feel sadness in my neck. And if you pause and, in the middle of having a really big emotion, and it really requires that a pause to notice, right? To bring awareness to it, we'll start to notice that, maybe I feel it in my chest, or maybe I feel it in my gut. And then we can start to get really curious about the sensation of, well, what does you feel it in your gut. So what does it feel like? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it tickly? Okay. And so in this way, I think somebody could have, this could help validate or just help someone believe that this is true, that an emotion, I feel it in my body. Mm-hmm. And so how do we go about working with, these emotions? The way I like to describe it, and this is where I like to bring in an analogy that I used to use when I was teaching science, is I used to, talk about diffusion of particles. Mm-hmm. Right? And so you have a cup, and you have water, and you can like try to visualize this. I have a cup of water, and I'm going to put like a little drop of red dye in my water, and that red dye is concentrated in the center of the glass. But then with time, the dye starts to diffuse, right? And then as it diffuses to take the container of the cup, right? And you can think of your body as your container, right? So the contours of your body. That the dye now, it's not so concentrated, it's diffuse. It's like very, very, the color of it is almost pinkish. It's not so red anymore. Okay, so this is how I like to teach my students to work with their emotions. And so when you pause and you notice that you're having a big emotion, that you notice where you feel it in your body, and often it's going to be like stuck in one location. And so this can show us that, oh, that's where that emotion is living inside of me, and maybe it's stuck there because I've just never paid attention to it. And my body doesn't want to feel it because it's uncomfortable and it's painful. So again, it's a protection mechanism of I'm just going to contract physically around that space so that I don't actually have to go and feel that space. Right. And then so we're like, oh, my neck is always tight, or, oh, like I always have a pain here. And we think that it's purely musculoskeletal, or it's just purely physiology. But then if we start to kind of go deeper, then realize that, oh, but like, why am I so tight in that area? And yes, sometimes there's imbalances in the body, but sometimes also it's due to just, well, I'm always experiencing sadness in my throat, and the pain of that sadness is so intense that I'm just going to tighten my throat so I don't have to feel that pain. And so I'm going to bring it back to the analogy of the glass, right? So when you notice that, I'll use the example of the pain in your throat, right? The idea is that can that be like the drop of dye that you're going to now let expand to go outwards, to move down into your belly, down into your pelvis, and to expand into the contour of your body. Okay? And so this is the thing that my students always ask me this. They're like, but Lauren, but if I do that, isn't it going to get bigger? That's the fear, right? The fear is that if I let this emotion, if I let the sensation travel and expand into my container, into my body, this is going to be overwhelming. It's going to take over. Okay? But what you have to understand with this process is that it loses power, just like that drop of dye that's super concentrated. As it starts to diffuse, it becomes less concentrated and it becomes more pink. It's the same way with an emotion in the body. As we start to let it expand, we start to feel spaciousness. And then we start to realize that it's not holding as much power over us. And in my way of explaining it, this is what I see as digesting our emotions. Mm-hmm. So by letting it expand, you digest it and then allow yourself to be free from it.
I love that analogy so much. And you're right. I could just see in the back of my mind, everyone listening to this going, but that's just going to make the emotion bigger. It's going to take it everywhere else in the body that I don't want it to go. What kind of tools or practices do you use with your students to help them kind of diffuse or disintegrate the intensity of those emotions and those blocks?
It's important to bring safety into the body. So if we're tying it back to the nervous system, if we're feeling that intensity, then that could mean that we're in our sympathetic nervous system fight, flight, or freeze response. And so it's important that we do something that's going to help us feel safe. Okay? So that could be something simply like leaning back in your chair if you're sitting. That could be something like if you're, standing, or even so you're feeling your feet on the ground, because that's that's helpful for grounding. It's going to take the energy down to the feet. I'm moving my feet as I speak. Another somatic practice that's great for bringing us into sympathetic response parasympathetic response, downregulation, is using the peripheral vision. And so you could just stare at a point. And I start a lot of my classes in this way, of where we just gaze forwards, but then we start to widen the field of view. And as we widen our field of view, this again just brings that sense of safety back into the body. Even drawing the eyes a little bit deeper into the eye socket, that's also helpful. So these are some somatic practices. It could also be a visualization. So some people like to just close their eyes and just imagine that where they're feeling the intensity of the emotion, that it's starting to move, and to bring the focus really down into the pelvis. And so just to imagine, and to release the weight of their body down into the seat and pelvis. So that's like a little bit more of a visualization. Sometimes just movement, right? So just like a little bit of shaking, and it really, again, depends on like the intensity. Sometimes if it's really, really intense, somebody might just need to move their body because they're like really in a state of fear that just that the shaking is going to help bring them back to safety. So those are some different examples.
Amazing. Thank you. I have one last question for you. And this is something that comes up a lot with students that have maybe not practiced a lot of yoga before, but they know it as something they go to the studio and do. But what I love is that you really emphasize this importance of being able to practice at home and being able to have your own practice. Can you talk about why that is important, especially if you're trying to conceive?
I mean, this is going to be different for every person's schedule, but it is definitely harder to, at least for me, and I think for people who have busy schedules, it takes more time, quite practically, to drive to a studio, depending on where you live, where you have a studio. And then, you're getting there early, have a longer practice. And I know when I go to teach a class, it takes about 3 hours of my day. And so if you're going to go practice, at least 2 hours, right? And so if you're trying to incorporate these practices more frequently in your life, I think that sometimes it's just not accessible for some people to be able to, just not realistic or possible to be able to get to the yoga studio 3-4 times a week. Right? So at the same time, I think it's important to see people and to be able to be in a space where we can co-regulate our nervous systems in our social nervous system. So I really like to promote, and this is what I do in my own personal practices, is having both of. So we have a home practice where we can maybe practice more often. We practice exactly what we want to practice in terms of, and again, it depends on level of expertise or, how comfortable you are, but it's nice to be able to sit down and just trust yourself. And to just move intuitively a little bit, rather than feeling like we always have to give our power to somebody else to tell us exactly what to do. So once we've done we have a little bit of knowledge, then maybe, we can do a meditation. I really like to encourage just sitting with yourself as a meditation practice of, it doesn't have to be an audio. It doesn't have to be a class or a teacher. Can you set a timer on your phone for 5 minutes? It doesn't have to be a lot. Right? It can be 5 minutes and just sit upright with yourself and quiet. And that is super uncomfortable for a lot of people, to just not have any sound, not have any movement, and to just sit for 5 minutes.
And it's so much harder than you would think, and you're dealing with the constant mind chatter and am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? And when you get to it, you realize that it's all right, all of it. Nothing is wrong in your practice. And I think that, yes, being able to just find that space for yourself is so valuable. Like you said, 5 minutes just makes such a difference as well.
And then I'll just say one other thing, and this is what I found. A lot of my students, they like home practice because they feel a little bit safer at home. So some of my clients that are coming in with body image issues, I think when we go to a yoga studio, again, it's easier to get caught up in comparison. And my body doesn't look the same as this person's body, and my body doesn't move the same as this person's body. And so for that reason, I think home practice is excellent for anybody that if that is the barrier to entry of, I just don't feel like I belong in the studio, well, then home practice, man. It's beautiful you're safe in your house.
Absolutely. No bra, put your pajama pants on. I mean,
This is how I practice every morning. I always say this to people, you don't need fancy yoga clothes to do yoga. You don't need a yoga mat to do yoga. You don't even need like a special devoted space to it. It's just about, I really like to encourage my students just to incorporate it into little moments of your life. You're sitting, I don't know, you're at a barbecue and you're at a park or on the grass. And can you sit in, I don't know, cobbler pose, wide-legged forward fold, and just do a little bit of stretching on the grass? Start to incorporate it a little bit more. And this is important too, I think, when we get into motherhood. And then that's often the challenge when we've had a practice and we start our practice again after having our children. is, well, I don't have not even 30 minutes to myself to do a practice. It's okay. Well, how can we start to just do little chunks, and how can we do a little bit here, a little bit there? So that we feel like we're doing a little bit of something. It doesn't always have to be, 30 minutes uninterrupted, an hour uninterrupted.
No, and you're right. It's cumulative and it adds up. And in some ways, these little mini snippets of practices I find throughout the day are sometimes a lot more helpful than doing, say, an hour-long practice, because it is, like you talked about before, that regular reminder for your nervous system to come into a place of stillness and safety, and just remind you that that stress response can calm down. You don't have to be in that state of fight or flight so often. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah. I always say that too. I'd say, 15 minutes, 3-4 times a week is way better use of time than one practice for an hour, like once a week.
Completely agree. And yes, it doesn't have to take over your life. That's something else I like to really reinforce with people who are struggling with trying to conceive, because it's like, oh gosh, now I've got to do a yoga practice an hour every day. I mean, the last thing you would want someone to take away from this is to be like, okay, well, this is another thing you have to do every day. Whereas no, it's something you can give back to yourself in little ways, as much as you want to and as much as you need.
I think that's something that I really have to coach my clients and students on, is not seeing these practices as a chore. And this is what I always start off when I start a program. I like to spend a lot of time around that. And I'm like, we might, and why do we see it as a chore? We see it as a chore because we're approaching it with masculine energy, and we're approaching it as we approach a lot of other things in life, of that there's a right way to do it. That's why we see it as a chore, is because it's like, I have to do it in this certain way, and I have to do it perfectly. And so it feels hard, right? But this is not a chore. This is not something that has to be perfect. This is you learning to take care of yourself and to mother yourself. And I really believe it's important that we learn to mother ourselves so that we can then mother our children. And I'm big into cycle breaking and, not perpetuating intergenerational trauma, and doing this work again in preconception and pregnancy, so that we don't have to do it after. I mean, I don't know that there's ever, we're never fully healed, but that's another thing that I like to really talk about, is just this work it's hard work, the deep inner work. It's not comfortable. But I do see the greater purpose of it, of benefiting your children, your family, your lineage.
What a beautiful message to finish on, Lauren. Thank you. I could talk to you for hours, and I often do. I can't believe we live on opposite sides of the globe and we've never actually met in real life. But if people want to get in contact with you or learn more about you, where is the best place to find you?
Yes. So on Instagram, I am at Fertile from Within. And that is my group coaching program, Fertile from Within, because I do believe that every woman has her fertile energy within her, or whatever gender. It doesn't have to be a her. But that this we've forgotten that we're disconnected from it. And so I like to use mindfulness, meditation, and movement to help my clients reconnect with that fertile energy from within. So at Fertile from Within. And I actually have a new mini course that I have ready. I'm very excited about it. It's my Mind Body Fertility Toolkit. And it includes 2 fertility yoga practices, 2 breathwork practices, and 2 guided meditations, along with a bonus talk on how to unleash your fertile energy from within. I like to introduce these practices to people that might not have used them before. You don't have to be experienced in yoga. Yoga doesn't have to be so scary. You don't have to be flexible. You don't have to be good at it in order to try it. Even if you've tried meditation before, you don't like it, I encourage you to try again. So that's why I've created this little mini course, so that people can just give it a try.
Amazing. Thank you, Lauren. And I will add a link to that in the show notes. Thank you.
Thank
I can't wait to
you.
talk to you again next time. Thanks for being here and just sharing your knowledge and your wisdom so openly and generously with everyone. So thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I love listening to how passionate Lauren is about everything that she teaches, and it is such an honor to be able to work with her. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with someone or leave a review. I always love hearing your feedback about the show. Now, don't forget that just before we finish up, you have just a couple of days left to jump inside the In Your Element Fertility Yoga program. This is my once a year group coaching program that offers you all of the ways in which these practices that Lauren and I spoke about today of yoga and meditation and breathwork, how they can support you not just on your fertility journey, but on your path to motherhood and beyond. I'm going to pop a link to that into the show notes. And if you have any questions about it, please feel free to reach out to me. Now, on the next episode of the podcast next week, I'm speaking to another special guest, Sarah Jamieson, who is speaking about something we all need to be very aware of, and not just those who are trying to conceive at this present moment, but people in general, and that is male fertility. The stats are frightening, and I won't go into too many details now because Sarah will explain it all in depth next week, but this is an episode you will not want to miss. So until then, I am sending you all my wishes as you continue your own journey to fertility. The most common thing I hear from students who are on their fertility journey is that the stress of trying to conceive has taken over their life. Your days end up being filled with endless appointments, navigating pregnancy announcements. You're trying to eat right, take all your supplements, and it is all you think about from the moment you wake up. I designed the Element Fertility Yoga course to support your body, your mind, and your mental health in 3 important ways: to synchronize your hormones, increase circulation and blood flow, and to help regulate your nervous system. But on top of this, the greatest gift that you can give yourself throughout this journey is a sense of peace, to help you calm your mind and just make this process feel easier. Every single one of my students tell me that this is the first thing they notice after starting a yoga, meditation, and breathwork practice. But on top of this, you have the amazing benefit of actually supporting and increasing your fertility. Studies have shown that those participating in mind-body programs as they're trying to conceive have success rates 3 times greater than those who don't. The course I've designed walks you through natural conception as well as fertility treatments and IVF cycles. And the best part is you can work through it at your own pace in the comfort of your home. The practices start from just 10 minutes per day. To learn more, visit elementpilatesyoga.com or see the link in the show notes.